time isn't real, so just pretend it's Monday, alright? Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me doing the weekly navel-gazing. Today, one day later, because the thing that I wanted to do on Sunday was also one day later. Anyway, this is when we talk about all the books I read last week, and all the videos I made last week, and all the books I plan to read this week, and all the videos I'm not going to make this week. Something like this. And then it usually kind of devolves into rambling. So, let's get started and talk about some books that I read last week. And I did, in fact, read quite a few. I did, of course, finish Blood in the Machine by Brian Merchant, which is about the Luddite Uprising and how it connects to contemporary resistance against big tech. Highly recommend that book. Really, really good. And then I went and read Harmattan Season by Tochi Onyebuchi, which is really good. I really enjoyed it. It was a great book. And then I read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and I didn't like it. We'll come back to that later. It's definitely very well written. All of that is in there. I'm just not the target audience, or at least not the target audience at this specific point in time. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on The Starless Sea. Then I did read Crack Up Capitalism by Quinn Slobodian, which is on the connections between neoliberalism and the contemporary populist right. Highly recommend that book if you want to get even more angry at people like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, which you should. Oh no, it wasn't Crack Up Capitalism. It was in fact Hayek's Bastards. I read Crack Up Capitalism a couple of weeks before. But all the three sort of like Slobodian books, Globalists, Crack Up Capitalism, and Hayek's Bastards, kind of tie together and follow the same sort of like investigation of neoliberalism and its effects on the world that we live in right now. And it seems the next book in that series will come out next year by Slobodian, together with a co-writer whose name I can't remember right now, which will be called Muskism, which I suspect is all about the way that people like Elon Musk are furthering that neoliberal techno-fascist sort of like agenda. I am certainly going to read that when it comes out, but for now, Hayek's Bastards, go read it. You'll probably not be very happy with what you'll learn. So I read that, and then I did read Behind the Startup, which is by Benjamin Shostakovsky, and it's a book about how venture capital, in fact, creates and informs technology and inequality and so forth, and how, the fact that our technical evolutions right now are funded by venture capital, how that does influence and impact tech startups and their culture and their innovations. And that's a really, really important book in that regard. I do recommend it if you're interested in understanding why tech companies and startups are making the kind of decisions they are making. In that regard, it's a good companion piece to something like Empire of AI by Karen Howe, which obviously also really, really important. So that's what I read. Then I read Silicon Values by Gillian York, which is about free speech and the future of free speech under surveillance capitalism. And it's a good book, more from like an activist kind of perspective on different aspects of censorship and free speech in a digital world that is run by a couple of corporations that may or may not know what they're doing and may have very specific needs and ideas that do not necessarily go together with what we as societies might actually understand by free speech or censorship and so forth. In that regard, I did enjoy that book. It was helpful, certainly, and I read that. And now I'm currently reading, and by the time this goes up, I might be done with it, that being The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, which is, of course, the sort of like standard text on surveillance capitalism from 2018. It's an excellent book. It's a very frustrating book, but I think it's essential to understanding sort of like where we are right now in a lot of ways when it comes to technology. And it does mention Marx and David Harvey and Hannah Arendt and Adorno, and so I'm very happy with the book so far. It's really clearly written. If you're interested in those kind of subjects, good book. That's what I read so far since we last spoke, which is, quite a lot. Let's talk about books that I plan to read now. That's a good question. I'm going to finish The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and then I'm slowly going to hopefully finish my readings for the upcoming video on artificial intelligence, booktube, and all of that kind of stuff. I have 2 more books sort of like on the list that I might be reading. One of them is Hubris Maximus, The Shattering of Elon Musk, which came out a couple of weeks ago, which is about the evolution of Elon Musk as a business owner and global player, political player, and so forth in the last couple of years. That's certainly going to be interesting. I'm interested in that because obviously Elon Musk, with his specific access to Grok and XAI, or whatever the company is called at the moment, is shaping artificial intelligence in his image in a lot of ways, which is, troubling. And the other one that I have on my list is Careless People by Anna Wynne-Jones? Is that a name? I'm blanking on the name right now. It also came out earlier this year. It's, of course, a book on, memoir on her time with Facebook and the way Facebook was maybe run or not run properly, which also kind of dovetails with that larger sort of like exploration of artificial intelligence that I found myself in by accident. Because obviously Meta is another corporation that is currently working hard on large language models and artificial intelligence, or generative artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, the sort of like corporate culture in each of these companies is kind of relevant to what shape the AI products that we have these days take. So I feel those books kind of cover that, like Empire of AI covers OpenAI and at least in part companies like Anthropic, because a lot of this kind of came out of the same sort of swamp in a lot of ways. Then of course Careless People covers Facebook, and Hubris Maximus covers the last couple of years of whatever Elon Musk is doing, whereas for example The Age of Surveillance Capitalism focuses heavily on Google as a company. So I think I have sort of like most things covered in that regard. So that's my reading plans. I will be traveling to another festival, so my reading might also be relatively limited. So we'll see where I'm at when I come back on Sunday, I guess. So that's roughly my plan for reading. If you have other suggestions, you can always put them down there in the comments, and this is your call for action. Let me know. I know that The Bewitching by Silvia Moreno Garcia comes out next week, I think, or the week after, so I'm certainly keeping an eye on that one. I want to read that. I know it's July, it might be the 16th, who knows? So I'm definitely going to read that at some point, which, might be nice to have some fiction from time to time in there as well. So, what about videos? Well, I did make some. I made a video for Harmattan Season by Tochi Onyebuchi, which I'm relatively happy with. I could have said more, but it's currently so incredibly hot around here that I run out of brain power when it comes to talking in a closed off room to, keep the noise down, and my camera usually overheats after like 25 minutes or so as well. So I'm limited in my thoughts, and there's always so much more to be said about any specific book that in this case we'll just have to live with the fact that this is the video I made on Harmattan Season. I highly recommend you read the book, watch the video if you feel like it. That came up. And I did make the video for my birthday. And this is sort of where the whole time dilation thing happened. I recorded the video on Sunday on Books That Made Me Who I Am, which is a collection of books. Some of them you've probably heard me mention before, some of them probably not. And it's a list of books that I think have shaped me as a person, and in particular me and my approach to talking about books, talking about politics, talking about history, philosophy, and so forth in a lot of ways. So I thought that might be interesting to some of you, and it was obviously one of the suggestions from the poll that I ran on exactly that for my birthday. So that's also something I recorded and I uploaded. We also had our monthly live stream on Saturday. I really enjoyed it. I have taken it offline, so it's no longer reachable, because during that very long stream at some point it got fairly rowdy and I got fairly agitated, to put it mildly, and while I stand behind everything I said there, I don't necessarily need to have too many graphic insults and so forth online. That's just not necessarily something I feel comfortable with, especially since, beer and so forth was involved, and I'd rather be, if I say insulting things, I want to be as clearly as sober as possible when I do that. So that's why this is no longer viewable, but I really enjoyed hanging out with you guys, and I hope you had fun while it lasted, and I'm sure we'll have like another get-together at the end of the month, probably. Just need to figure out which weekend this will be in July, but we will have another live stream, and I for one can't wait. So that's what I did video-wise. Now let's talk about videos for this week. Well, we're somewhat, as I said, time delayed, because while I recorded my video for my birthday on Sunday, Sunday was my birthday, I even uploaded it on Sunday, and then for some weird reason I forgot to click publish on Sunday. It was uploaded on Sunday evening, and I just didn't send it out into the world, which I did yesterday, and so now we're one day delayed, which is why the weekly Navel-Gazing is happening today, which is kind of nice, I guess, because at the end of the day, as I said, I will be traveling to another festival, only come back on Sunday. Chances are that I won't have another video until next Monday for the weekly Navel-Gazing, so we've spread this out slightly. I think that's a good idea. And then we'll see. Next week, hopefully, the artificial intelligence video will be done. I hope to be done with all the reading by then. And hopefully, while at the festival, talking with friends and so forth, maybe that will help me sort of like structure the thing already in my head to bring it all together into like a somewhat cogent argument, and then we'll record that next week, and hopefully other stuff will follow, maybe even more talks about specific books. Who knows, maybe I'll read some that I feel comfortable talking about, because that's certainly something I've been struggling with of late. Now you may have noticed that like I've been reading a lot of non-fiction this year, and I certainly have noticed. I've read some fiction books, some of them I made videos about, something like The Deluge, of course, Goliath by Tochio Onyebuchi, now Harmattan Season. But it's always more difficult to make videos on like non-fiction books, I think, because unless there's like more to be said there about like the way they structure their arguments or whatever, I would just be repeating the arguments of the non-fiction book, and at that point I can just go like, hey, this is really important, go read that book, and then we're done. So I struggle with reviewing or discussing non-fiction books unless there is a larger point to be made, which is generally something I try to do when I talk about books. Even with fiction books, I try to explain sort of like how they fit into like a specific tradition, narrative tradition or whatever, how they use how the author uses specific techniques or what, and so forth, made stylistic choices and so forth to further their argument. That's just the way I personally think about art and think about books, and try to sort of put that into the videos to make them at least interesting to you, because I don't necessarily feel like I should make, your classic book review where I end up with like stars and so forth, which I obviously don't do anyway, but I don't necessarily feel that is something that I can do in a interesting way, because my personal tastes in books are very, very weird and specific, so there's very little for you to learn beyond me telling you that you should read this book because it's really good. So I try to add sort of like things where I'm like, yeah, maybe if you've read the same book and you've enjoyed the book, maybe I can add some points that you maybe weren't aware of, or so that can help you appreciate the text more, because now you know more, because I genuinely feel and believe that the more we read, the more we know, the more additional stuff we know from all kinds of different disciplines, whether it's like science or history or philosophy or just context of other books, that the more we know, the more we can appreciate another book for fitting into that larger sum of all art that we've consumed over the years. That's something that, say, someone like Umberto Eco would probably call the lexicon, right? Like our lexicon. Like the more we know, the more we can actually appreciate what an author has done. So my hope is usually when I go through these things and add some bits and pieces of information and try to contextualize stuff and so forth to make your experience of reading that book, or once you've read the book and watched the video, your experience of like thinking about that book, to enrich that in some way or another. That is sort of what I'm trying to do with these videos about books. Usually those are obviously books that I really, really enjoy. And I also just like think that like it helps me to sort of like, after reading a book, to think about like why did this book work for me, or why didn't it work for me? What made me angry about it? What made me happy about it? And rethinking that and rephrasing that and contextualizing that helps me sort of understand myself a bit more, which is, not bad, and hopefully sort of like helps some of you as well with like, enjoying books, which is kind of the goal here. And that's something I find interesting, because I've been thinking about this obviously a lot over the years, and just recently when I just mentioned that I both read like Harmattan Season and The Starless Sea, and a lot of people I know really enjoyed The Starless Sea, and I was trying to figure out why it really made me angry. That book made me really angry in a lot of ways, and I think there's a lesson to be learned here. Like The Deluge did not make me angry. It was a very, in a lot of ways, like concerned with the world today. Obviously, it's climate fiction, and makes statements about climate change, the political systems we live under, how those make it maybe very hard to almost impossible to actually actively counteract, mitigate the effects of climate change, and so forth. And that's a book that works really well for me at this point in time. And the same kind of goes for something like Goliath by Tochi Onyebuchi, which deals a lot with like colonialism in a lot of ways. And Harmattan Season does the same, because officially we have kind of left behind the classic 19th century form of colonialism doesn't mean we still don't have like forms of economic imperialism and other forms of that, and racism and so forth, right? So these are books that deal with the world right now, and they does fit into sort of like the framework of the stuff that I've been reading otherwise, right? Like I've been reading a lot of Frantz Fanon recently, or rereading some of it, and that really sort of fits well with me reading Tochi Onyebuchi. On the other hand, I've been reading a lot of like economic stuff and so forth, and that fits well with books on climate change and so forth. And I think this is something where I can kind of draw these things together again, and maybe that explains my sort of dissatisfaction with The Starless Sea, because The Starless Sea, as a book, tries incredibly hard to avoid making any statements about the world, making any statements about politics. It's sort of like probably the most supposedly like cozy fantasy I've ever read, and there's a reason why I don't read cozy fantasy, because right now this doesn't work for me. I know it came out in 2020 during the pandemic, so I kind of get why hit a nerve with a lot of people. And I've often said that if you are in one way or another like a marginalized person, especially if you're like somewhere in part of the queer community, for example, with all the attacks that the queer community has had to endure over the last couple of years, especially trans community and so forth, right? I understand the joy of reading a book that where you feel seen, because there is queer characters in there, and that does not constantly repeat or that doesn't force you to encounter the same levels of hatred and conflict that you encounter in the rest of your life. So I understand the appeal for that. I feel, for me, at this point, it doesn't work. I'm obviously, I'm slightly marginalized when it comes to like disability, but beyond that, I am not marginalized in any of these forms. I don't necessarily for me, this form of like full-on escapism, or like performative escapism of making everything as cozy as possible and so forth, just makes me personally really angry, because it feels like burying your head in the sand. And once again, I understand that that's my personal background in this regard, but I think it's interesting to think about that. It also is, once again, about the time, because that was in 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic, so it fit better around then. But we are living in the year 2025, and the world is decidedly not okay, right? We don't need to talk about like every specific political thing happening, but we have several wars going on, we have some genocides going on, we have a lot of like brutal stuff going on in every country. The far right has been on the rise once again, here in Germany and other parts of Europe. You look at levels of, all transphobia in parts of the world, especially in the US and in the UK, for example. You look at everything going on in the US, for example, at the moment right now. It's like, shit's on fire, is basically the result. And I feel like it has reached that level of sort of like being on fire, that where I feel forced, not forced, but like driven to actually be a more actively political person. It's like, we can't ignore this shit anymore. We probably shouldn't have ignored it like 5 years ago, but right now it just doesn't work, which is why I feel that's sort of like we're trying to connect things again, right? This is why I think I'm reading so much nonfiction at the moment, because clearly educating myself about like what's going wrong in the world helps me, well, not regain control, because obviously I don't have control, but like at least the illusion of control, because I can imagine that I kind of understand things slightly better, and understanding is sort of like the first step towards control, right? Or at least the feeling of control. So I think that's partly where that comes from, and where that sort of like need for, or enjoyment of more overtly political, overtly activist kind of fiction also kind of falls into. And I think that's something that really drives me also in like the stuff that I try to talk about here on this channel, and of course the way I talk about this channel. And like when we talk about the stuff that I did on anti-intellectualism, for example, a lot of times I'm sort of unsatisfied with the way that parts of the booktube sphere are dealing with the world right now. There's obviously a lot of people out there who are well, going for all escapism and bemoaning the fact that books have become too political or too direct in their political messages. It's certainly something I've spoken about in the past, right? And I feel like that is certainly detrimental to the world right now. Once again, I understand where sort of where the need for coziness comes from, but it's people complaining about too much politics in their books are usually on the other side of the political spectrum, and those people don't have, they're already on the march. Them complaining is furthering an agenda that will lead us down some very dark paths. So I often get annoyed with that, like really angry with that, and then there's of course the need to stay unpolitical, to not talk about things like capitalism and so forth too much, which I think makes it difficult to have statements about things like supposed anti-intellectualism, criticizing things like artificial intelligence, use of artificial intelligence in the book community, talking about book talk, all of those kind of things, without framing them with like systemic criticism or anything of the sorts, makes it basically impossible to talk about them, or possibly even just furthering the harm that is already, done by the hyper-individualist approach to blame that we have developed under neoliberalism, right? And that's certainly where I struggle so much with my place also in this community in a lot of ways, because clearly not that many people want to do that, or maybe are unable to do that specific level of systemic analysis or criticism, and that's kind of where my attempts to make these more educational videos, like the one on anti-intellectualism and currently the thing on artificial intelligence, kind of comes from, and where also my sometimes too long and too complex research process kind of falls into, because I want to get it right. At the end of the day, I want to get it right, and I want to leave myself open to as little criticism as possible from other parts of the community, from people who may have opposing views to mine, because as soon as we make these kind of claims, we start an argument, whether we want to or not, right? And that's why I try to put in, do as much research as possible, and because I struggle with a lot of insecurity in these regards, it's very easy for me to get lost in that research and then not actually record the video forever. And that's kind of where I'm at with the artificial intelligence video now. I think I've read more or less everything I should read. I need to read to make this all work out, which is why I wanted to read the one on venture capital, because that's just like a really important driving force behind the thing. And now with the surveillance capitalism book, I feel I have basically everything, but adding those two books, and I wanted to read the one on careless people, the one on Facebook, careless people. I wanted to read that anyway, so it just is a good excuse to do that right now. Same goes for the Hubris Maximus. That also is very much a book that I wanted to read, because once again, we're talking about the people that are shaping the future right now, and a lot of them have like lots of problems. So adding that personal level in there, in addition to the systemic level, is sort of what I'm trying to do. And hopefully next week I'll manage to actually pull all of this together, and then we can have us a conversation about artificial intelligence in earnest, and not just blame some person for using an ugly artificial intelligence cover on their book and how that's the end of the world, because that's just a symptom. Anyway, speaking of symptoms, my brain is melting because it's way too hot, and I should probably slowly end this. Thanks once again for actually sticking with me all this time. I really, really appreciate that. I hope you read some good books. I hope you had fun over the last week, despite everything. I hope you'll have a great week this week around, and I hope things will, continue as good as possible for you. Like, subscribe, do the things, join the Patreon if you feel like it. Do all of these things, or don't. Just make sure that you, stay alive and stay as well as possible. And I'll see you very soon. And until then, thanks and cheers.